Coming up on this episode of Tom Talks Rubbish.
It's hard because I'm literally basing my self-worth off of the opinion of strangers. It's uh, whether or not these people think I'm funny means everything, to what I'm
Mm.
doing. And there's times where some of the shows are just excellent and you feel like the man and there's nothing can bring you down. And then some of these shows, it's like, I did a theater packed house, crushed it, felt great. And then, a week later, I'm doing a corporate event. Like I'm going to a company to perform for
Yeah,
their
yeah.
workers at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday, and all the lights are on, and half the people in that room don't want to be there. And, they're getting underpaid. And then they see me coming in, they're like, how much are they paying this clown?
What's going on, guys? And stand back for another interview. This time, I'm joined by the one and only wrestling fan, comedian Dan Brown. So, welcome on the show.
I am very happy to be here. Thank you. I'm very happy to be talking rubbish with Tom.
This is my pitch for people that start a podcast. Think of the name because it'll be the name that you have to be followed, be followed around with, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. And had I known people were gonna make those jokes every time someone comes on the show, I might reconsider. But here we are. Do you know what I
No,
mean?
that needs to be your hook, man. That this is the hook, dude. It's great. It's kind of like I mean, in the UK, do you guys have Howard Stern?
I know the name. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's something like that where, it's the Baba Booey. You-
Mm.
I'm talking rubbish with Tom. That's your thing.
Okay. Okay. I didn't think of it like that, but that's a very good point. That's a very, very good point. So you brought up things like that. But obviously, we mentioned off camera and on camera that you're a wrestling fan, Dan. So where do you first
Yes.
discover wrestling as an overall fan?
As an overall fan, I mean, I had a couple like wrestling toys when I was a little boy, but like never actually got to watch it. Then one day, and thanks to our friends over at Between Two Beards, one of the listeners actually helped me find it. My dad had on, flipping through channels, and he turned on WCW for a hot minute,
Mm.
and it was back in October of 1994. Hulk Hogan came out with Dave Anderson, and Hulk
Mm.
did this big promo. And when I was a little boy and I saw that, I truly thought Dave Anderson was Hulk Hogan's brother because this was my first um, introduction to wrestling, and I
Mm.
didn't know that Hulk just called everyone brother. So I
Mm.
thought Hulk was pitching this match with him and his real life brother. I'm like, oh, this is great. Hulk's gonna win. His brother's gonna win. Um, and then as years went on, as you become a bigger fan, and time in between and everything, you start to realize like, oh, Hulk didn't actually have a brother, in
Yeah.
wrestling. So that memory was lost for decades, literally decades. Um, but that was my first introduction to wrestling. Other than that, when the 90s hit and wrestling was super big, my dad kind of banned it from the house. So I used to do that thing where
Mhm.
you turn the TV down, you turn the volume down all the way and
Yeah.
watch it in bits and pieces. And then I have to go to the school the next day and ask my friends, like, okay, so I watched it from, 9:15 to 9:30. What happened between 9:30 and 9:45? And, you know, uh, that kind of stuff. And the video games, WWF No Mercy is still my favorite video game of all time.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I still have, this love for WCW, NWO Revenge for N64. And then, that was something to help build the fandom. Then once my dad unbanned it from the house, I mean, I was as hooked as you could be. I was watching Raw on Mondays. I was watching SmackDown on Thursdays. US, how it is here. Uh, and then we had local channels that, just local UHF stations. I don't know if you guys have UHF in the UK or know what that
We
is, but
don't,
yeah.
unfortunately, but I
So
do know what you're talking about.
yeah, so it's literally channels only to this particular city in the United States that you can get. And they would often be searching for content. And a lot of times it was, playing really old movies, maybe stuff that was in the public domain. This way they didn't have to pay for it. But late at night on Saturdays, they would also play um like the TNA recaps when TNA was just the pay-per-view uh weekly episodes.
Yeah,
So
month was
yeah.
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, so I mean it would be, an hour on Saturday nights, just catching you up for some of the stuff you missed. And then they would also show some independents as well. Like they showed HWA, Heartland Wrestling Association, a little bit after they were the WWE developmental
Mm,
company. They showed CWA, which was based out of Akron, Ohio. They showed some stuff that was based out of West Virginia, all over the place. So, I mean, anything that resembled professional wrestling, I was watching.
mm. And initially, though, I'm curious to know. You talked about discovering Hulk Hogan in 1994.
Yeah.
What was your reaction then? Because obviously he's a bit older in 1984. This is also pre the heel turn. First of all, what was your reaction to the heel turn in 96? And then second of all, what was your reaction to Hogan when you go back to what I call the Hogan 80s boom period?
So my first reaction to Hogan, and so I get to have that little bit of bliss where I'm still a child at the time, and it's my first time seeing him.
Mm,
And the only thing I know about wrestling is that he's the greatest wrestler of all time. And
mm.
it also kind of helps that in the background, Jimmy Hart's holding up, the World Heavyweight Championship. That was a fun little reminder. So as a kid, I'm watching the greatest wrestler of all time, and I'm not jaded by the internet wrestling fan base. Well, it wasn't an internet fan base back then. It was just a dirt sheet fan base,
Yeah, yeah.
smart fans, as they're called. So I wasn't able to be jaded back then about how the Hogan act has gone stale.
Mm,
So, um, fast forward to 96 when he does turn heel, it's something that kind of shocks you. And I think it's one of those things that as a wrestling fan, I think it's a good shock. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Because I mean, I don't want to come on here and just start blasting wrestlers because I don't like to do that. Um, I went through a little bit of a stage a few years ago where me and another comedian were like going through a competition to see who could get blocked by the most celebrities. And when you're as big of a wrestling fan as I am, most of the
Mm,
celebrities are wrestlers, and then you realize like, wait a minute, I'm getting blocked by all these people I'm huge fans of. Um,
mm.
this isn't cool. And then as I put content online more and more over the years, you start to realize that, sometimes some of these hateful comments really like there's a person on the other side.
And they could come back to bite you as well.
They absolutely can. And I'm going to go back and answer the question here in a second, but I'm just going to say what I have learned is to answer those hateful comments with class and just
Mm.
say, I'm sorry you didn't like my material. Thank you for giving it a chance. I hope you find some comedy that you do like. And maybe that puts them in a different, mindset going forward. Is like, hey, let's maybe not be so mean and negative online. Maybe there is another person on the actual side, on the other side
Mm.
of the phone. Um, and then, with these wrestlers, it's like, hey, these are guys that essentially go out there half naked. Yeah, literally and figuratively. They literally go out there half
Mm.
naked to, perform this art, this sport, and they're putting their body out there, and I don't blame them at all for blocking people who are intentionally just there to be mean.
Mm.
So having said that, let's go back to what that good shock was. Hogan during that time, if you remember, was getting booed. I mean,
Mm.
people were tired of the act, and it was something that needed to be done, and it was something that most of the fans had never seen before. So reaction as a kid, hated it.
Mm.
Reaction as an adult, gotta love it, man. I mean, it went on to kick off the Attitude Era. It went on to it would DX have been created without the NWO?
I don't think so, personally.
Yeah, I mean, and who knows what would have gone on to be here, but would the Bullet Club have been created without the NWO?
Mm.
I mean, maybe, but to the, does it give it that same feel without it? I don't think
Mm.
so.
I understand what you're saying completely there. You talked about there. I'm really curious because I obviously in the wrestling circles, I see people in the media getting blocked by wrestling wrestlers, should I say,
Yeah.
wrestlers, people involved in wrestling and stuff like that. So I'm really curious to know who was, you talk about this blocking competition, who was some of the bigger wrestlers that did block you?
The I'm going to start off with the three I regret the most. One of my all-time favorite wrestlers, CM Punk. Um, which I'm guessing he was at the time he was training for UFC. He was training for one of the matches and got hurt, and somebody asked him like, "What kind of exercises are you doing to stay in shape while you're injured?" And he said, mostly the elliptical. To which I replied, "I would have thought it was walking out." Um, because
That's good though. That's
yeah,
good though.
I will say this, as mean as it was funny.
As a punk fan, that stung
Yeah,
a bit, but I'm like, no, that's good. I'm gonna give you that to you. To be
and
fair,
I deserve the block. Again, I deserved all the blocks. I got blocked by Big Show, which man, do you ever listen to Big Show be interviewed?
mm,
Incredible,
mm,
incredibly fascinating man. Bully Ray, I know he's 50-50 with the wrestling fan base. Half the fans hate him, half the fans love him. I love him. I dig the guy. Was blocked by Ryback, wasn't too heartbroken by that, but he unblocked me,
did
uh,
he?
which was weird. And then at one point he followed me on Instagram before unfollowing me on there too. So I have no clue what happened. Um, was blocked by Josh Matthews from TNA.
Mm.
Um, I was blocked by Vince Russo. Uh, I was blocked by my my crown jewel was Dave Meltzer.
Oh wow.
So, and I know Meltzer does block people, so it's like, what did you really do to get blocked by him? Um, are we allowed to swear on here? As long
Yeah,
as it's not
go on. Yeah.
okay, because I want to make sure, and I wanted to make sure before I, started going
If
off that you
it's
didn't.
too bad, I will, the bleep, bleep, like
Sure,
yeah,
sure,
bleeped
okay.
out. You know what I mean?
Just want to make sure. I don't trust Dave Meltzer's reporting. I think he's very biased. I've thought this for a long time. This is pre AEW, by the way,
Mm.
and I probably sent him about a dozen or so tweets, asking him to support that he has his sources and to finally tell the wrestling fan how big is Batista's dick. Uh,
I forgot about that.
and that's the one thing, and the one group of people I don't sympathize with on Twitter are politicians because you put yourself in the public sphere, you absolutely deserve to deal with the public. Um, so if there's any politicians that I really get irritated with, I will constantly send, tweet at them how big is Batista's dick. Uh, which
Okay.
for the intern dealing with that has to be completely confused.
And completely maybe annoying if they but I can imagine if they are wrestling fans, they're gonna pop out of it because I can't imagine that's a fun job. You know what I
Oh no,
mean?
exactly. And it's one of those things where if again, I mean, I don't know any United Kingdom politicians here, but in the United States, politics gets pretty dirty, pretty
Mm,
negative. We're in a very weird time here in the United States. A lot of people are clinging to one side or the other. So
mm,
if one person who I feel is being too ugly, not with their physical looks, but with their verbiage, if they're behaving that way,
mm,
I'll ask them that a couple times. If you want my vote, tell me how big is Batista's dick. And
mm.
yeah, I mean, if you're an intern dealing with, the amount of people saying, burn in hell and all that stuff, and then up pops, my Twitter account asking you a ridiculous question like that. Yeah, if you're a wrestling fan, you gotta be excited to see that.
Oh god, yeah. Definitely. So you talked about some of the stuff you've done in comedy when it comes to wrestling and using sort of your comedic side in wrestling. Where is your, before we get into your comedic side and stuff like that,
Yeah.
after the 90s, where did your wrestling fandom go?
So I mean, I stuck with the WWE for the longest time. I mean, I went to TNA's first house show in Ohio. I had to drive about 4 hours away for it. Um, I I was watching weekly,
Mm,
same thing. Before there was a WWE Network or Peacock or anything like that, my friend and I would go to, as high schoolers, we would go to one of the bars that would play it by us with his mom. His mom would take us
mm,
in, have a meal, watch the pay-per-view. Um, Went to all the shows that came to Cleveland. Went to a few of the surrounding areas like Akron, Youngstown,
mm,
the house shows that came that way. Um, Went to WrestleMania in 2007, WrestleMania 23.
what
Um,
a great mania. I will say that.
that was I've been lucky enough to go to three of them now. And the three I've gone to have had some big moments. That one there was Batista and Undertaker. That one was Cena and Shawn Michaels in 23. That was
Which match is better in your opinion?
my heart goes to man, my heart's got to go to Undertaker and Batista because that was the one I was feeling the most that night. I mean, don't get me wrong, Cena and Shawn Michaels tore the house down.
Mm,
And John Cena is somebody who I've always been openly a fan of. So when everyone was chanting Cena sucks and, and all that stuff, I was the one guy going, "Let's go Cena."
mm.
You know, uh and
Yeah,
it's
I was too.
dude, well, it's like how can you deny that? I, think about it like this. Has any wrestler ever been booed as hard as he has and left to a standing ovation almost every single night the way he did
Mm,
for 10 years? I mean, I can't think of a single person who did.
mm,
I mean, even Roman Reigns during his bad period, I mean, people booed him from the start and they booed him till the end.
mm,
And later to find out it's not his fault, that's another man's fault who pushed him a little too hard, but sorry if I'm drinking too much. If I talk too long, I get a dry mouth. But
I know the feeling. I've got a
yeah,
drink next to me as well, so it's totally
okay,
cool.
good, good. But I mean, my fandom never really left. I've been a diehard for as long as I can remember. There's been times where I've taken small breaks of,
Mm,
maybe 4 to 6 months off, where especially in the, you know, probably from 2018 to 2021. I mean, from WrestleMania to almost SummerSlam, I'd have to turn off the TV because, I mean, the booking was just so bad.
mm,
And I'd watch the pay-per-views, but I wouldn't watch the weekly show because the pay-per-views usually were still good. You
mm,
know what I mean? Like the matches were still fine. The matches were still entertaining. It's just the logic of how they got there made no
mm,
sense.
mm,
And then, with TNA, I mean, or not TNA, I'm sorry, with AEW on the rise. For a while I was watching weekly. I, I I feel for a lot of those guys. I still consider myself an AEW fan.
mm.
I watch a lot of it on fast forward. My issue is that I have absolutely zero faith in Tony Khan. To
Okay.
and I hate to say that. I wish he was the money guy and he had anyone else running that company.
Mm.
But that's where we are right now. I started watching when I was a kid, as soon as I was allowed to watch, and I didn't have to hide the television set or, turn the volume down. I've been watching publicly ever since and haven't stopped.
Two unrelated questions.
Sure.
What lost your what words? Use words. What lost your faith in Tony Khan?
You know what? That's the thing. I don't know if I ever truly had faith in him. He's always been just from the outside looking in. He's just one of those guys, and maybe it's the comedian in me looking at
Mm,
everyone like the carny that they are, and whatnot. I look at him and I'm like, here's a guy that hasn't earned his money.
mm,
Like it's a guy who we all publicly know that his dad gave him the money because he wants to see his kids have some fun with it. I have no doubt in my mind that Shad Khan loves his son. I have no doubt in my mind that Shad Khan is proud of his son, and I have no
Mm.
doubt in my mind that Shad Khan is having so much fun watching Tony Khan have fun. I
I believe the quote when Shad Khan was talking about uh why he invested in AEW was essentially, I want to see what Tony Khan will do with his inheritance before I die.
yeah,
Essentially. I believe that was the quote. I don't know if I butchered that, but I believe
I,
that
I
was the rough quote.
I think you're right. And it's definitely something like that. And ever since he's started AEW,
Mm,
it's been, I mean, it's almost like it is what it is. It's a fan running a company.
mm,
And it's one of those things where if somehow I got a wrestling company and it was like, oh man, I get to hang out with all these wrestlers. This is awesome. That's probably not a good way to run things.
mm,
And I think the biggest part of it was I started taking him more seriously when they got CM Punk
mm.
because shortly after getting CM Punk, they got Bryan Danielson and they got Adam Cole. And that's when you're realizing like, hey, they're starting to really get some steam here and some guys who could do some damage. Um, when did Samoa Joe jump in? Was he
I
pre CM
want
Punk
to.
or?
Mm-mm. I, you were asking me. My memory's terrible. I
Yeah,
I
it's
want to
funny.
say I don't think he was actually there that long in Punk's run. I do not believe he was actually there that long, but I'm gonna have to look that up, and my editor will have to put a date on the screen for me because I do not remember off the top of my head. Not gonna lie.
I don't either, and that's also part of the problem is that the company's not that old. It's only 5 years
Mm.
old. I mean, we shouldn't be, having this kind of memory issue. I'm sure somebody out there is listening, going, "Oh, I can tell you exactly when Samoa Joe
Oh,
came in."
probably, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, then again, I'm closer to 40 than I am 30,
And
so
I
my
have brain damage, so there you
yeah.
go.
But I so CM Punk comes in and is doing CM Punk, and it's making good television. I mean, the stuff he did with MJF was absolutely incredible and elevated MJF, and everyone he was working with was being elevated. And then he gets hurt. And, okay, injuries happen. Um, and then you start seeing, you know, Meltzer reporting a lot more negativity about Punk. And it's one thing for somebody like Eddie Kingston to say nobody wants you here, and because that's Eddie's shtick, right?
Dick,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
that's Eddie's thing. And for Eddie to talk trash in the way he does, Eddie talks the way he looks and fights the way he looks, and it works with Eddie. Um, but you start noticing a couple other things, and it's one of those things. As a fan, I've always just assumed that the Bucks were in Meltzer's ears, and I consider myself a Bucks fan. I do. Um, but it was also making sense. Like, man, why are they trying to bury their top guy?
Mm,
And it's one thing if I'm just going to pick a name. Dolph Ziggler was trying to bury John Cena because with or without John Cena, WWE would survive, kind of thing. I mean, without Punk, AEW headed down and in the ratings and
mm,
attendance, and has unfortunately only continued to go down. I
mm.
guess Wrestle Dream had a good house. I'm very happy to see that. And I'm sure everybody in the house last night had a good
For
time.
people that don't know, because this might have aired a few months after, we are recording this the day after Wrestle Dream. We will just point that out.
Oh yes, thank you. I think I do think that the people who bought tickets to Wrestle Dream had a good time. I'm very happy they got to experience that. Um, but it's been a consistent show by Tony Khan that showing by Tony Khan that he's not there to make money.
Mm,
He's there because this is something he's always wanted. And I mean, Punk was on. Ariel Helwani's podcast and literally said that exact same thing. It's not a company based on selling tickets, it's not a company based on ratings. It's a company based on what Tony Khan just wants to do.
Mm,
And as long as he's footing the bill, they'll be able to do it. And the dude's got plenty of money to back him up.
mm, I
Having
understand.
said that, all these wrestlers getting these massive contracts, great for them.
Yes,
Good for you.
I do agree.
Get
Definitely.
get that money, get that money and secure your future, man.
Mm. I do agree. So you talked about earlier that 2018 to sort of 2021, your fandom for WWE sort of died out slowly. During that
Yeah.
time, were you watching AEW or how were you keeping up? How were you filling, this sounds really dirty and not what I mean. How were you filling the wrestling hole in your life, for lack of a better
So
word?
I filled the wrestling hole by listening to wrestling podcast
Okay.
and listening to, and I'm a Jim Cornette guy. Love Corny. So listen to Corny, listen to Bruce Pritchard, listen to Jim Ross. Um, I loved Mick Foley's show, by the way.
So did I.
I loved it, and it broke my heart when he stopped doing it. It truly did. Um, I loved Mick Foley. I enjoy Jeff Jarrett's show. Kurt Angle's show can be fun. So I started filling that wrestling hole with the podcast and also just kind of going back and watching
Mm,
things that made me happy from the past. Like I'm one of those guys, I can watch Rock Hogan from WrestleMania 18 a million times and it's
mm,
not going to get old. Um, I can watch Austin Brett from WrestleMania 13 a million times. It's never going to get old. So I would fill that wrestling hole with the wrestling that I still enjoyed.
mm. I understand what you're saying completely there. So then, before we get into your comedian side, because you are here to promote stuff, I do apologize, my friend. We've just
No,
gone around the houses. So,
I
sorry, I do apologize, man. Anyway, how did your fandom then change when Triple H took over as head booker of WWE?
so I loved what he was doing in NXT, and I
Mm,
thought NXT was great. And you know, when they went from 1 hour on the network to 2 hours on USA, I knew that there was going to be an issue because you're literally having to double the amount of time you're booking
mm,
for. Um, didn't think it would be that big, and then of course the pandemic hit and whatnot. But the other thing I was afraid of was NXT goes from an internet show to an actual show on television, and once that happens, Vince McMahon's going to have his fingers all over it.
oh yeah.
And I was just texting a friend the other day, and I'll word it like this. I could probably spend all day talking about the good things Vince McMahon did for wrestling and what he did for people, and then
Mm,
spend the next couple days talking about how he absolutely killed professional wrestling,
mm,
and then spend the next week talking about what an awful human being he was.
mm-hmm,
Like so I'm I'll give Vince his credit where credit's due on the business aspect of things, but at the same time, we cannot be blind to what a terrible man he is, and we also can't be blind to, well, yeah, he's made WrestleMania this yearly event that gets in between 50 to 100,000 people, but having
mm,
said that, you've completely killed everything we know as wrestling, and for a long time, I, I mean, wrestling used to have 8 million people watching Monday nights, and now you're lucky if you get two.
mm,
Whose fault is that? That's that's his.
mm.
Okay, and have you seen the meme of uh the guy who's pushing the little domino and each domino gets bigger and bigger
Yeah,
and like the
yeah,
little
yeah.
com so I made a couple of them recently and one of them was Vince Senior asked Vince Jr. to be an announcer, and that's the little domino. And then the
Mm-hmm,
big domino is Hangman Adam Page sticks a syringe in Swerve Strickland's mouth. The big domino is the, I believe in Joe Hendry, clap, clap. Because truly it all started with that little domino
oh,
is
definitely,
it,
yes.
to get where we're at right now. I think um when NXT went to television, Vince was putting his hands in it more and more. And then if you remember in late 2019, early 2020, right before the pandemic, it was being announced that Triple H's job title changed, and everyone's like, "Is Triple H getting demoted?" And at first, I scoffed at the idea. I was like, "Come
Oh
on,
yeah.
is Triple H ever going to get demoted? That's the one guy whose job is safe." And then you quickly find out, oh my God, no one's safe there. His daughter's not safe. Uh, Triple H isn't safe, and we see NXT become a shell, an absolute
Mhm.
shell of itself. And it truly has taken from the time Vince stepped down that first time to where we are right now for both NXT and the main roster
Shawn
to
Michaels is doing phenomenal work with NXT.
absolutely. And this was the thing too when Vince first stepped down, I remember talking to a different group of friends about this saying, it's the TV's still going to mostly suck, for the foreseeable future because I love Finn Balor, but how many years under Vince McMahon has he been treated like, you know, bottom shelf, maybe mid
Yeah,
card tier guy?
basically Triple H had a lot of rehabilitation to do
Absolutely.
before TV could get good.
I mean, look what he did with Chad Gable. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we had Shorty G.
Oh, I'd forgot about Shorty G.
That's the one thing I point at. And Chad Gable was in the main event of Raw a couple times recently.
Hmm. Yeah,
Would Sami Zayn be in the spot that he is without Triple H? I mean, Sami
probably
Zayn
not.
beat Gunther.
Probably not.
You, you know,
Would because there was reports when Vince came back from the first time that Gunther was going to be buried,
yeah,
if I remember correctly.
yeah. Actually, I think that was a report from right before he left the first time.
That's what I'm. Oh, really? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
if I'm right, my timeline's right. Um, there was okay. He's the IC title. He's going to lose the belt here soon and be absolutely buried and sent back to Austria and doing the Indies circuit before he realizes it. And who knows? Maybe that was the thing that made Triple H, send that article to the Wall Street Journal, being
Do
like,
you
"Hey,
believe that?
I think it was either Stephanie, Triple H, or Nick Khan.
Hmm.
I believe. I'm
Oh, it was almost
speculating.
like Macbeth then. You know what
Yes,
Macbeth is, right? Like,
yes. Oh, of course. Um, I truly believe it was one of them, and because I mean, look what happened immediately for all of Vince's men. Once it was confirmed he wasn't coming back, little by little, they're all gone. Kevin
mhm.
Dunn, gone. Um, I think
Retired, if I remember correctly.
Bruce Pritchard has always gotten a bad rap for being a Vince guy, which I'm absolutely sure he is. And if you listen to his podcast,
Hmm.
he's been very complimentary towards Vince for the most part over the course of the life of the podcast. Um, but I think it's one of those things where he was probably more loyal to Triple H than people realized.
Oh, he
Um,
wouldn't still be there
yeah,
if he
absolutely not.
if he wasn't if he wasn't and this could date this podcast slightly, but as we record this in 2024,
Yeah,
uh October 13th, he wouldn't still be there if what's it called? If he wasn't loyal to Triple H. Look at Kevin Dunn. Look at
yeah. And I mean,
I'm trying to
maybe,
think of people off the top of my head, but you see my point.
but maybe not. Maybe loyal isn't the best word because it makes it sound like, a dictatorship.
Okay.
But
If he wasn't I'm trying to think of the word, but you'll know what I
if
mean.
he wasn't buying into Triple H's line of thinking, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Like it, like if he wasn't, I get what you're saying too. I'm hoping everyone else realizes what we're trying to say here. It's Triple H values what he brings to the table,
Mm,
and he values Triple H's leadership.
mm,
So, um, I think Triple H has done an excellent job. I think his good booking has been excellent. I think his bad booking has been downright evil. Uh, I think some of the things that I've disagreed with, I went like, "What the fuck are we doing?"
mm,
You know, um, but I think Shawn Michaels has completely turned around NXT, and
mm.
I'm wondering, should Sean be promoted in the near future? You know what I mean? To booking main roster.
I don't think he'll be promoted officially, but I do think it's more of a collaborative effort than
Sure.
we think it is. Do you know
And
what I
that's
mean?
the and I think that was also part of the issue was that, Triple H saw the talent in the guys that he did that Vince wouldn't see. Like, imagine a scenario, knowing everything that we know now about who Vince McMahon was as a businessman, as a promoter, as a
Mm.
person. Could you imagine the first time Vince McMahon turned on anything of NXT and saw Johnny Gargano and went, "What the hell is this?" You know what I
I
mean?
don't even want to think about that.
Yeah, well, that's like and I'm a Clevelander. Johnny's Cleveland boy, so he's
Oh
hometown.
yeah.
I saw him wrestle on the Indies a handful of times.
As a Cleveland man, I've got someone to ask you about in a second.
Oh, absolutely. He's one of those guys that, I've seen. I had a friend start training with him actually.
Oh,
It's I'm so happy to see his success, but at the same time, you know, pro wrestling is pro wrestling. When SummerSlam was in Cleveland and the SmackDown was in Cleveland the night before, and Johnny walks in as tag team champion, and I'm in a group chat with some buddies, and they're like, I can't believe they would have Johnny lose the title in his hometown like that. And I was like, okay, but as talented as he is, put him next to Jacob Fatu. And you can't book for the hometown. You gotta
and
book
second
for
of
the
all, that is a WWE tradition. You lose in
yeah,
your hometown.
it is. And we can all thank Bret Hart for that.
I see what you did there.
Well, we can. I mean, he didn't want to drop the belt in Canada. He didn't want to drop in Montreal. And ever since then, I mean, yeah, we get a couple of, title changes in the hometown boys favor. Like I was at TLC and Stairs in 2014.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was in Cleveland, and Dolph Ziggler beat Luke Harper for the IC title.
Oh yeah,
Dolph Ziggler's a Cleveland guy. So, having said
phenomenal
that, that was the
match.
opening match. Yeah, that was the that was the opening match. Had it been the main event, chances are Dolph Ziggler would have taken out on a stretcher. Um, Luke Harper would have stood over him. You know, uh, any other heel would have been out there, kicking him while he's down.
Yeah.
It's just the WWE way. But um,
You said some of Triple H's booking decisions have made you die inside. So, what is
yes,
Triple H's worst booking decision in your opinion?
I think, golly, it's one of those things where right after I said that, I started thinking about it. It's like, well, what was some of his bad stuff? And I know if I think hard enough, I'll definitely get there. Oh man, that's a hard one to say. I don't know, and I'm going to make myself a hypocrite a little bit on this
Okay.
because I'm a fan of Bronson Reed. It broke my heart after he returned, and then for a year and a half, watching him go out to the ring with no reaction from the fans.
Mm,
Um, but we've also learned that Triple H is not going to give up on certain people.
mm,
And I think right now, Bronson Reed is the star example of, what happens when you don't give up on someone. And that's making me reconsider Karrion Cross. You know what I
mm,
mean? Like I thought Karrion Cross at first, I'm like, this guy's going to be a star. And then, after the run that he's had, I was like, maybe I was wrong. Um,
mm,
but when you see what he did with Bronson Reed, and then you start seeing what he's doing with the New Day, and what he's doing with the Miz, and all these kind of things, and it's essentially going to what I hope it's going to be is Sean O'Hare done correctly.
mm,
The devil on your shoulder kind of guy.
mm.
Um, I'm going to be optimistic about it here. Um, but I mean, just some of the stuff Man, you got me there because it's one of those things where I know I've been
I asked the
mad.
hard questions on this show.
You did, man. I know I've been mad watching it, but I can't think of
Is
when it
that
was.
more like I hate this term, but is that more like Mark fan outrage?
It's
And then
got to be.
a
But
couple of days later, you calm down and you're like, oh, I get it now.
you know what? I hope you're I you know what? I hope you're right. I hope you're truly right with how you phrase that because I for the longest time was a fan that tried thinking I was smarter than
Hmm.
what was going on. And right now I can't tell you under Triple H how much fun I'm having just being a fan.
So am I. That's the
Eh,
other thing. Like the one I will use as my example, and I'm talking about myself. I do apologize, man.
no,
But
no,
the
please.
one I will use as my example is I was outraged that Cody wasn't going to finish his story. But then when I found out
Okay.
that the Rock was going to wrestle, I was like, I can live with that. Like I can live with that. How I don't like how we got here, but I like the destination.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I also thought it was funny because did you watch that hour-long documentary they did on WrestleMania this past year on
Half
YouTube?
of it, half of it.
Okay. So at first when they were like, okay, it's going to come out like a week after WrestleMania, and then it's like, well, we have so much footage, it's going to be longer. I
I think The
sincerely
Rock
thought,
used his powers. I think The
oh,
Rock used it.
of course, I sincerely thought, I'm like, maybe we're going to get a series out of this, like an 8-part WrestleMania series. How great is that going to be? And then we got the one documentary, and I'm watching it, and essentially is The Rock coming out being like, okay, so I broke the toy, but I kind of fixed it and I made it better. And and it's one of those things where it's like you can almost see in Triple H's like face, like as he's talking about like, yeah, so uh the plan was Roman and Rock. And like you could see in his eye be like, I fucking hate saying this right now.
I've been given a script, for lack of a
Yeah.
better word.
Yeah. I mean, I've watched people read hostage statements that were more convincing than that. You
Oh
know?
wow, yeah, I can see where you're going with that. I already.
Well, I mean, this was also during the time, and I think Conrad Thompson said it best, was you look at the landscape of how it is with TKO, that
Hmm,
Triple H's boss, or The Rock's boss is Triple H. Triple H's boss is Nick Khan. Nick Khan's boss is Ari Emanuel. Ari Emanuel, who was part of the William Morris agency, the biggest, talent agency in the United States,
hmm.
um, who then combined with UFC, who then combined with WWE. His boss is his biggest star, which is The Rock.
It's a sort of a
It,
circle,
it's
isn't it?
it's that vicious circle right there. And I don't have it on me right now. I actually had a a circle that explained Ric Flair, like up here. Ric Flair is unhappy and requests his release from WWE. Ric Flair goes on to do a bunch of like indie shows. Ric Flair signs with the competition. Ric Flair is completely unhappy with how he's being used by the competition.
Ric
He
Flair goes
talks
back to WWE.
he well over here is he talks about how much he loves Vince McMahon as a person. Other company releases him, then he's re-signed by WWE, only to start back at the very top where then he gets
Hmm.
unhappy, and it's
Yep,
it's just a process that repeats itself.
I've seen that. I've actually seen that.
Yeah. And I apologize, man. What was the question again you asked? Oh, the about the Mark fandom, about the
Yeah,
booking.
yeah,
I sincerely think that's where we're at right now with Triple H, is that, he's still somebody that's a fan at his heart.
yeah.
And he's a fan of professional wrestling. And his goal is just to put out the best professional wrestling TV show.
Hmm. Do you think, how do I phrase this? What do you think Vince McMahon's worst wrestling booking decision was?
Oh man. Well, I mean, if this is an hour-long show, we'll be doing a we'll be doing an 8-part
We
series.
could do this in a
Um,
series, but yeah,
I think one of the ones I'm still angry about, it's like, what would you go back and change, is Triple H beating Booker T at WrestleMania 19.
exactly what I was going to say.
I mean, how, because it was one of those things where okay, maybe the intention was Triple H to win the whole time. But if you're going to do that, hey, let's not have some of the most racist, angles we could possibly do.
Mm,
On top of that, I think um, that was bad. I think uh, over the course of years, forcing Roman Reigns as a babyface
mm.
was awful. Just awful. The guy was, you look at, and I'm Roman Reigns, and I will say this is probably my all-time favorite wrestler. I
And
name
I'll ask
my
you that,
son,
and I'm gonna ask you that in a bit.
I name my son Roman to give you an idea.
Mm.
Name my youngest daughter Natalia, and while we're at it,
Are you
my Great Danes. What's that?
you're definitely a wrestling fan, aren't you?
Oh yeah. Well, my Great Dane's name is Dusty. My Beagle's name is Ember after Ember Moon,
Oh
and
wow.
my Saint Bernard, who we recently had to put down, his name was Heyman.
Oh,
Um, so I everything's going to be wrestling based. Um, I was a huge fan of Roman Reigns. I look at him, I'm like, this guy has it. The fans are being way too rough on him, but I understand why because they didn't like what was going on. It was,
mm.
you know, it, every time you heard his music go off for years, you thought about the greatest faction that we had seen in the longest time breaking up.
Yeah.
And he still went out there dressed in essentially Shield gear. It had his logo on it, but I mean that's what it was. And everything they did, it was just misstep after misstep after misstep. I think Brock Lesnar beating him at WrestleMania 35 in the fashion that he did was absolutely awful. Was it 35 or
34,
34?
but I take your
34.
point.
Yeah. I think I mean, well, shit, look at, right after uh that WrestleMania when they're at was it that WrestleMania where they went to Crown Jewel and they had the cage match and Roman spears him through the cage
Yep.
and
The
technically
that was
Brock.
the pay-per-view after.
Yes, and there Brock was named the winner even though Roman's feet technically touched outside first.
Mm. Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think okay, so this is a two-parter because it goes back to back years. Uh, the Hell in a Cell between Roman and Braun Strowman that ends in a no finish when Lesnar returns.
I think I know where we're going with the next one.
Followed up literally the next year, a match that is made so there's a definitive winner. Remember, that's the whole point of Hell in a Cell. The match is made so there's a definitive winner. You can't get in, you can't get out. The very next year, Seth Rollins wins, loses disqualification to the Fiend from
Stop.
stop stop match only for the Fiend to come up and hit him with the mandible claw afterward. Like, why wouldn't he do that to the referee as well for stopping the match?
Mm.
And I thought if you were going to have the match be that way, what you should have done was okay, you start throwing the chairs and everything, and he's got the sledgehammer and whatnot. He's ready to start, wailing on the corpse underneath the chairs, and then do the lights out. And I'm not a big fan of, the supernatural stuff in wrestling. I'm not a fan of the overly goofy stuff. Some of it's good,
Mm.
but for the Fiend, I thought this would have saved the night. He does that, and then up on the screen is the Firefly Funhouse, and it's Bray Wyatt all dressed up and smiling and clapping. He
Mr.
goes,
Rogers.
"Yeah," and Seth, I'm really sorry for what I did. And then cut the screen, and then the lights come on, and then you see legs underneath the chairs, and and of course, when the lights are out, you hear him with taking the sledge, bashing the chairs, and then as he pulls away the chairs, you see Becky Lynch just laying there.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So somehow Becky got underneath the chairs and then Seth was doing that. But then of course, the Fiend's right behind him and gives him the mandible claw. And that of course would have ended the that would have won the Fiend the title anyway. So there was a lot of issues with Vince McMahon and his booking. I think a lot of Bray Wyatt stuff was mishandled. I mean, we can run the gauntlet for days.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Days. Yeah.
We've been talking for nearly an hour, my friend, and I do want to be respectful of your time.
Oh
But
no, I'm great, man.
I always like to ask my guests normally as wrestling content creators, how they deal with burnout as creators and stuff like that. So as a comedian, because I know that I used comedy as a relief and things
Yeah.
like that. How do you deal with burnout when maybe you've been on the road or you've had to put too much content together or you're putting a show together and things like that? How do you release burnout?
A lot of it these past couple years has just been taking a little bit of time away to spend with my kids, spend with my wife, to um, intentionally take a week off here and there. Because it
Mm,
was one of those things where uh I mean, I've been doing this for 14 and a half years now.
mm,
I mean, I've been doing comedy for a long time, and about 2 years in, 2.5 years in is when I started getting like some road work. And then about 3.5, 4 years in is when I was getting consistent road work,
mm.
and then these past however many years I've been getting predominantly headlining work, the guy closing out doing 45 to an hour.
Oh wow, congratulations.
And thank you. And it's a difficult journey, and it's I explained this to my therapist that it's hard because I'm literally basing my self-worth off of the opinion of strangers. It's uh, whether or not these people think I'm funny means everything, to what I'm
Mm,
doing. And there's times where some of the shows are just excellent and you feel like the man and there's nothing can bring you down. And then some of these shows, it's like, I did a theater packed house, crushed it, felt great. And then, a week later, I'm doing a corporate event. Like I'm going to a company to perform for
yeah,
their
yeah.
workers at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday, and all the lights are on, and half the people in that room don't want to be there. And, they're getting underpaid. And then they see me coming in, they're like, how much are they paying this clown? Uh, and a number of things are going on, and people are pissed off. I actually did one not too long ago for a company that had a meeting to tell everyone that there were going to be layoffs. And then they said, "Well, to brighten up everyone's day, here's Dan."
Ow.
Imagine trying to cheer everyone up after,
Or trying to just bring the crowd up in general.
yeah, and now everyone's wondering whether they're going to lose their job. And you got me talking about Batman and wrestling.
Mm,
Um, so, and actually last year, I had this awesome gig. It was a corporate, but it was multiple days. It was for the company Whirlpool,
mm,
the washing machine people.
mm,
It was for their corporate event in Walt Disney World Resorts. So for 3 nights, I got to stay in a Walt Disney World resort. I was treated very well. I was paid nice. I got to do this cool thing. It's kind of like the Saturday Night Live weekend update kind of shtick where, that was I was helping them promote their new um, things in comedy bit form,
mm.
and it was awesome. And then the very next week, I am in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the first weekend of February. It is
Oh
negative
no.
15 degrees outside, and I am in a motel that smells like stale cigarettes. And that was such a kick in it's like, dude, I ain't shit. Like
Nothing else humbles you like comedy. Like
I was up here, and then that next week I was right down here.
a
And
good friend of mine actually writes for. Have the In-Betweeners made it into the UK?
what's that?
To the US. Have the In-Betweeners made it into the US?
In-betweeners. It sounds familiar. Let me look it up here. In-betweeners. It does sound familiar. In Oh, I recognize this.
Mm. So, um, a good a friend of a friend sort of writes for one of the guys in the In-Betweeners, one of the actors in the In-Betweeners that does stand up, and I got to meet one of them, and he basically said to me, "Dude, nothing humbles you like comedy. It's
Oh yeah.
like you go, you could stay in, I believe his words were like a five-star resort in Spain one week, and then be
Yep.
in a shitty little. I've just sworn on my own channel, but oh well, a shitty little bed and breakfast, or not even a bed and breakfast, just like somebody's couch the
Yeah.
next week is the way that he phrased it to me. So I have nothing but respect for comedians. I'm not gonna lie,
Thank you,
or
man.
just people that go on the road. I'm not gonna lie, because
Yeah,
that's I'm
I
not
mean,
about that life. I like my home comforts too much.
it's one of those things where I'm on the road and I hate it, and then I'm at home and I hate
You
that I'm
it.
not on the road. Like it's you know,
So
like I
basically, you're like a wrestler. You hear about
yeah.
them wrestlers in the wrestling podcast that are like, I needed that time off. I've got nagging injuries, and then they get that time off, and they're like, okay, I'm bored now. Don't know what to do.
Yeah, it really is. And it's I wouldn't say I'm quite Ric Flair, with my attitude towards that, where, Ric Flair has the stories of he's on the road, can't wait to get home. Then as soon as he's home, he went to like Greg Valentine's house, like down the
Mm,
street, because he couldn't be home. Um, I mean, it's definitely challenging. My son is in jujitsu and hockey. My daughter, my middle child, because
that was
my
going to be the
youngest.
next segue, actually. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah, because my youngest actually turns one tomorrow.
Oh,
And then so my other daughter is now in dance, and my wife will send me photos of them at these events when I can't be there, and I'm so proud of them and I'm happy for them. And part of you is like, man, I wish I could be there.
mm,
Um, and that eats at you,
mm,
because it's one of those things where, but going back to your thing about burnout, there's also particular events I will not take bookings for. I will not take bookings for my children's birthdays, um, or any kind of major events in their life. My son had kindergarten graduation, found out what preschool graduation, I apologize. He had graduation, found out when it was going to be, took that day
no
off my
bookings
calendar.
that weekend, sort of thing.
No booking, and also took the day off before to make sure. Like, I'm going to be home, I'm going to sleep in my bed, I'm
Mm,
going to wake up the next day ready to go and watch my son graduate.
hmm.
Um, and so I mean, for baptisms, things like that, I'm going to be home for my kids' baptisms.
Wedding
I'm going to be
anniversary.
Yeah. Actually, the wedding anniversary is something my wife and I agreed I could be on the road for. Uh,
Oh, really?
yeah. I mean, we've been together for 10 years, total, dating and everything too. And I would explain to her, before we met, I was doing comedy so much, it was a hard time like having a serious relationship with somebody. And I would explain to them, like, this is what I do. I'm gone. Like, and if we get to the point to where we're serious and I had to pick between you and comedy, I'd pick you, but I don't always have a choice.
Mm,
And that was something I explained to my wife when we again first started getting serious. And I don't know if I told her this, but I told the other girls, and I was like, and if you got a problem with that, that's fine. I'll be saying this exact thing to the next girl I date then. Um,
mm.
you know, I don't know if I mentioned that part or not. But
Obviously not. You're still together, pal. So I would assume no.
yeah. Well, I mean, she's a no bullshit kind of person too, which
Okay.
is something that I needed, like, from that aspect, because all of my jokes, I explain it like this, all of my jokes are fictions based off of truths.
Mm,
So think of it like a biopic, you know, like the Elvis movie.
mm,
Yeah, there's bits and pieces that are based off the truth, but it's a rather inaccurate story of what truly happened.
mm,
I'm trying to make it the funniest it could possibly be, with also giving it a that hint of reality, so where I'm coming from is still like genuine,
yeah,
kind of
I
thing.
understand.
That's how I try to view it. Um, so with her, I mean, she's been supportive, but again, I mean, there's times that it gets rough where it's like, hey, I'm gone, you know, hey, I'm going to be gone Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I'm coming home late on Sunday,
What's
and
the
then
longest you've been on the road for?
consistently like a week. I mean, it's not. I some of those, I know a lot of comedians are like, oh, I've been gone for 4 weeks, and I don't think I could do that. And it's
Mm,
also one of those things where I'm also at a point now where my mental health is like, I'll turn down certain gigs now too, because it's like I remember how excited I was to be able to get booked, and somebody's like, "I'll give you 25 bucks and a cheeseburger,"
Mm.
and I'm like, "Awesome." That
Yeah.
to me, that was the level of success. Like, dude, does it get any better than this? And now,
But
if
then you
somebody
got
were
a
to,
family to think of. Like it's
yeah,
different.
it really is. And there's some gigs I'll talk to my wife beforehand where I'm like, hey, if I do this, we'll lose money on it, but this puts me in a better position
Down the
for
road sort of thing, which could make more money.
exactly. Like I did one um like a week ago. I went to a club and it was just a one nighter. And I had to take an airplane to get there. And luckily airplanes to Florida are cheap. So from Cleveland to where I was going. I was like, I'll still come out in the positive, but it's going to be kind of close. But having said that, this now also puts me in a position to where, hey, I came out here, one time. Maybe I got to do another one nighter with them. Who
Mm.
knows? But eventually, it's going to get to the point where, hey, we'll bring you here for the weekend and it pays this much. And then at that point, it's a no-brainer to do it, kind of thing. But
Mm.
having said that, it's different doing that with a comedy club or a theater compared to, hey, Ricky's Bar in, Erie, Pennsylvania wants me to do a show for 50 bucks. No, I'm I'm
You'd
I'm
spend
turning
more on
down.
gas, probably.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's about, well, to get to Erie, that's about how much in gas I would actually spend. But at the same time, then at that point, it's like my time is better spent elsewhere.
Mm.
At home, editing videos for TikTok, you know, at home, writing, or in general, just at home, spending time with the family.
Mm. How
You know,
important do you think your content creation side is to building your brand nowadays, Dan, for a comedian?
I have gone kicking and screaming into this era.
Okay.
I did not. I didn't want to do TikTok at all. I didn't want to do YouTube at all. I just wanted my work to speak for itself. But unfortunately, that's just where we're at right now. You have to put videos out there. You got to have Facebook. You got to have Instagram. You got to have TikTok. You got to have YouTube. You got to have everything. Um, I don't know when, but I'm going to be working on a couple new podcasts. Just again, my own thing, get things
Mm.
out there.
You
Um,
should have a wrestling podcast, man. I'm
I've
surprised you
I've
don't.
tried I've tried in the past. One of the ideas I had was, what if I watch really bad matches with people who aren't fans and I have to explain to them what's
I
going
think
on?
that's been done. Hmm.
Is it really?
Uh,
I'm sure.
do you
Let's
know
say,
who Sam Roberts is?
yeah.
I think
Is that
he's
what he
done.
does?
I think he's done. He used to at least do a segment of his show on there.
Okay. Well, don't get me wrong. I'm sure it has been done. You know.
Again, this has been done. Do you know what I mean? Like this
Yeah.
has been done, but I put my own spin on it.
I actually had I had somewhere, I think, I lost it, or maybe I threw it out accidentally. I had a notebook full of matches ready to go
Mm.
of like I had Braun Strowman and Nicholas versus the Bar at WrestleMania. Um and this way I don't show anyone, I don't explain the match going into it. I show them the match and then I'm explaining how we got to this point, kind
Mm-hmm.
of too. I also had the APA versus Public Enemy. Did you ever see that match on Heat?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Is that the one
Um,
with
I,
the? That's not the one with the chair shots, is it?
oh yeah, that's the one where, I mean, that Bradshaw and Ron Simmons went to town on those
Oh, that's
guys.
the table thing, isn't it? Where they didn't
Yeah,
want to get put through tables, if I remember correctly.
and that was, and it's always funny when somebody, you hear somebody in wrestling like they would say no to Ron Simmons. It was like, no, you're gonna
JBL
have,
would be more the scary one, in
yeah,
my
but it's
opinion.
like, but you remember like Ron, just how big and strong he was. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you're gonna have the match Ron wants to have.
Mm.
Whether or not he cooperates with you is another thing. Um, and that's also like the wasn't there the rumor with Dean Ambrose and Brock Lesnar, like at their WrestleMania match, like
Yep.
Ambrose was like, I want to do
32.
this and
He
that and
wanted to
this and
use the
that.
chainsaw. He wanted to do this.
Yeah.
Brock was
And
like,
Lesnar was like, no. And then didn't they have like a spat, and Lesnar essentially went like, okay, how about this? How about you try to have the match you want to have? And then I'll try to have the match I want to have. And then after I'm done beating the piss out of you for 45 seconds and leaving you dead, I'll just walk away.
mm,
And because essentially, what are you going to do? unless you bring a gun to the ring, you're not going to beat Brock Lesnar in that
Hmm,
scenario.
I understand.
Um,
Hmm.
then I'm trying to think what other matches I had. Do you remember Wrestling Society X,
I
that
do
MTV
not.
show? You
Oh, I
don't.
do actually. I've heard of it. I think Brian Zane might have done an episode,
Okay.
if
So
memory serves
it
correctly.
it was one season, and what's wild about it was like you see Jack Evans on it. Um, I mean they had Teddy Hart on it. They had a bunch of people. There was one guy that only made one, I believe, one match appearance on that show by the name of Tyler Black.
Oh, really?
That years later would go on to be the number one wrestler on PWI Top 500. The guy who would go on, the biggest star they would end up having on the show was not even close to being the biggest star on their show.
Hmm.
So I mean, and plus you haven't seen it, um, go and watch it. It's on YouTube. It is a wrestling company made for people with ADHD. I mean, uh, Jay Lethal was on it too. That's right. That's who I was trying to think of. Um, or yeah, Jay Lethal was, I believe. But yeah, it's go watch it, put yourself through it. It is fun. It's
Hmm.
terrible, but it's it's entertaining. At one point, the ring announcer calls off a match.
Oh,
I don't know
wow.
how to explain it. The commentators were very confused. They would always have like a an American like rock band or whatever like playing a song before the show. They've taken it out due to licensing or agreement agreements and whatnot, but they would have the band do commentary in the first match. And one of them, the guy was like, "So how long you been a wrestling fan for?" "Oh yeah, I like wrestling. I remember Bret Hart and Steve Austin." And like that was the extent of the guy's
Oh,
contribution
wow.
to the show. So,
That's really, really cool. As we look at wrapping this up, Dan, because like I said, I do want to be respectful of your time. I have two questions for you regarding your comedy career before
yes.
we do a staple on this channel, which is generic wrestling questions. I'm curious to know, do you view your career in comedy so far as a success? And if you stepped away tomorrow for whatever reason, what would you want your legacy in comedy to be?
Wow. Um, do I consider my career a success? My honest answer to that is no, because, and this is something I've had to talk to other comedians about, because it goes back to the whole, would you do the show for 25 bucks and a cheeseburger? Um, when I was first starting, that was the kingdom right there.
Mm,
And it's one of those things where it's, every once in a while you have to stop where you're at and look back to see how far you've actually come. And I'll do that every once in a while, but I'm constantly looking at what I truly want ahead of me. And maybe this is the CM Punk fan in me of him considering himself a failure in WWE in his first run for not main eventing WrestleMania, even though he had truly an excellent career.
mm,
And he beat the odds. You know what I mean? Like he clearly was not a Vince McMahon guy, but he made it to the top of the company. He beat John Cena, for the belt. He went on to hold the WWE Championship for over a year. Um, t- but for myself, and this is one of my issues, it's always, okay, well, what's next?
mm,
And until I get that what's next, I don't think I'll be truly satisfied with it.
mm.
Um, and as you're saying it, I'm having these epiphanies. I feel like I'm in therapy right now. I feel like I'm
Sorry.
talking like you're my therapist.
Sorry,
And,
dude.
and no, good. It's all good. Because I remember when I did dry bar comedy. Do you know what that platform is?
I've heard of it
Okay.
again, but I'm not
It's a it's
100%
a
sure.
clean comedy platform. And I remember at one point that was my biggest goal was to get on dry bar comedy. And I remember when I got the email back from the guy, it was actually on the anniversary, my wedding anniversary. I got the email and I'm like, honey, we got to do all these things really quick before we celebrate. Um, and I'm sending out headshots and I'm doing all this stuff and I'm panicking and I'm looking at my email back to them and I'm rereading it, making sure no words were spelled wrong and whatnot. And I was being so, neurotic about it. And the 2 months leading up to it, I was in my basement every night. There used to be, it's now a home gym, but I used to have it set up like a comedy club. I had a stage on the floor here. I would set up a video camera. I would turn off the lights. I have a spotlight, on me, and I would practice my set every night for months
Oh wow.
to prepare for that. And to me at that time, if you would have said, what's your biggest, what would be successful in comedy? To me, it was getting a dry bar special.
Mm,
And I got that, and it was cool.
mm,
And it was one of the best experiences of my life. But now I'm looking at, okay, what's next?
mm.
So, am I a success? Not yet. Um, by my own definition of continue getting what's next. I do know other people, and I'm gracious to have a good support group around me of family and friends who would consider me a success, and that
Mm.
means the world to me. Um, as for if I just quit tomorrow, what would it be? I'm hoping that the friendships I've made in doing comedy continue to live on after I do comedy. You know what I mean? Where
Yeah, yeah, totally.
it, are these actual friendships or are these transactional relationships?
Mm.
Are we friends because we just happen to see each other every day? Kind of like when you get a new job and, you know, you're like, oh, I'm going to miss my old coworkers. And then you get the new job and you don't even think about the old coworkers anymore because now you've
Yeah.
made a new group of friends. Um, have I made lasting relationships? And I'm going to tell you this story here. Um, and I'm going to try not to cry.
Oh
And
wow.
hopefully I don't because I've told this story a handful of times now. My home club is a comedy club based out of Akron, Ohio, Cuyahoga Falls, but right outside Akron, called the Funny Stop Comedy Club. And the owner, Pete, when I first started doing stand up, I waited about almost 4 years to go there because I had heard like he heckles comedians, he busts your balls, all these things, and I was like, I don't know if I could handle that. Um, Knowing what I know now, I'm kicking myself every single day that I never went back there from the beginning, consistently from the beginning because he turned out to be one of my all-time favorite people in
Mm.
life. Uh, his wife Nadal is a saint. His boys are intelligent young men. Um, his one played football semi-professionally, American football. Um, the other one is finishing up med school. Brilliant young man. And as you got to know Pete, he was a trip, man. And yeah, he would heckle you, and there were things about the funny stop where it was like the owner heckles you. There's no doors to the bar, so every once in a while, in the middle of your punchline, they would be doing a mixed drink, and as you're going to say the big joke, the blender goes off and you can't hear it.
Mm.
There were so many things that it's like this would be a terrible place, but it was all magic and
It
it
was the
all fit.
atmosphere.
It was, and it's my favorite place to be on earth is at that club. And I worked my way up that club. I did the amateur contest. I emceed, which is the guy opening up the show. Then he
Mm.
bumped me up to co-feature, so me and someone else doing 15 minutes. And then he bumped me up to feature, which is me doing 20 to 30 minutes. And then he bumped me up to co-headline, so me and another comedian would trade off nights, headlining. Then he bumped me up to headlining the off nights, like on a Thursday or a Wednesday. And then he bumped me up finally last year to the headliner spot, my own weekend
Yeah.
headlining. Um, Friday night, normal Pete, come in there, busting your balls. you know, having fun. He had a thick Lebanese accent. So if I you can't talk about Pete without talking in his voice. Dan Brown, let's get some people in here. Dan Brown, you gay. Uh just who he was. Um and Friday night had two good shows. And then uh Saturday night comes around and I get there and I always get places early. I was like an hour early because I'm paranoid about
Yeah, yeah.
that. And they're like, Pete had to be taken to the hospital today. Nadal had to take him. And we've known Pete for a while, and there were times like his blood sugar got low, and you're like, oh man, that sucks. I hope he's okay. They're like, yeah, his neck was swelling and he was complaining about a headache. You're like, oh, that's weird. That's different. And first show, audience wise, was great. Okay. But amongst me and the other comedians that showed up were feeling down because a very important man to us
Yeah.
was not doing well. Not even midway through the first show, his brother, who works in the kitchen, leaves to go to the hospital. And that's when we
Okay.
realize
This
things
is
are not
serious.
good. Um, and all of us are waiting on updates. And then during the late show, um, my feature is on stage. He's doing his sales pitch. So he's got like 3, 4 minutes left in his act,
Mm.
kind of thing. And we had received word at the time that Pete passed away. And we're crying and hugging. And it's one of those things where um, one of the most important people in my comedy career, and quite frankly in my life, died.
Mm.
And now in 3 minutes, you have to wipe away your tears and go on his stage at his club and go do 45. Go do 45 minutes. The audience that night was incredible. Um, it was cathartic. I I'm getting goosebumps here. I get off stage. One of my buddies is like, "Okay, we may have been told the wrong thing. We don't know if he's alive or dead." So imagine I'm on stage thinking he's dead the whole time,
Yeah.
finding that out. Um, we found out that night he went brain dead, and he was on a ventilator, and they're trying to get family in. They're trying to get family in from Lebanon. His son was in Lebanon when this happened. So they're trying to, keep him alive for family to come in. People say their goodbyes. Um, and he died. He officially died a few days later. But I take a couple things away from that weekend. One of them, somebody had to point out to me that I was what he wanted his club to be, and not just me, but there are other comedians. But his last weekend on Earth was a comedian that went to his club and started on amateur night and worked his way up the ranks, and that was what he wanted his club for. Um, and then he would uh he would do this thing where he would walk away like mid conversation and then come back and have another conversation. And it doesn't matter what me and you are talking about. We're talking about what he wants to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, I
And
get you.
and you know, we would be talking. He comes up and goes, these comedians, they don't appreciate shit. I say, fuck them. And then walks away and then comes back. I got to tell you about my dog. And
Mhm.
totally different feel. And he was also known for just leaving without saying bye to anyone. So um, that day, I called into the radio station to, plug the shows. And they're like, "So, you got any good Pete stories?" And I'm like, "Oh, I got plenty of Pete stories." But, I'm like publicly, I'm never gonna actually mock the man. I know a lot of people make fun of the voice and everything, and it's easy and it's fun.
You do it out of love. It sounds like you do it
Yeah,
out of
yeah. Oh, I do. And because I mean, I got plenty of stories with the guy where right after my wife and I got engaged, I went there and I bring her and the headliner that weekend walks in. He goes, "This is Dan Brown. He's a very funny comedian." And you're like, "I love this. This is going to be his wife. She make big mistake." Um,
love. I'm sorry, but that's funny. That is
It's
funny.
he was the funniest dude, man. So at one point when he's walking away and coming back, he goes, "Dan, I heard you said something nice about me on the radio." And I'm like, "Of course, Pete, I love you and I appreciate you." And he said, "Thank you." And that was the last thing we said to each other.
Was that, how do I say this without being horrible? Are you glad that that was the last thing you said to him? Are you like, thank God that was the last conversation we got to have?
In a way, yes, because I know he would get hot-tempered with some comedians. Because, and
Hmm.
there was one time, actually, a few months earlier, and it's one of these things that I regret that I didn't do something
Mm.
because he made it so much fun to interact with him. Some comedians would take advantage of him,
Okay.
and it's kind of like, let's say in wrestling terms, let's say you walk into a locker room and Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns are going back and forth, cracking jokes on each other. Let's just say, hypothetically. And then in walks Enzo Amore, hypothetically. And then he tries to crack a joke. And it's like, hey, he can say that about me. I can say that of him. You ain't a part of this.
Yeah.
You're at the bottom of the totem pole here, buddy. Um, and I saw a bunch of comedians do something, and I came close to snapping, and I'm really mad I didn't. Me from a few years ago probably would have went off on a couple of them and went, "How dare you disrespect this man and his club?"
Yeah.
Because how many of these other clubs are giving you guys the opportunity that he is right now? And for you to come in here and disrespect him, like I was furious. Um, I am grateful that that was kind of the last conversation that we had. Um, I've seen comedians walk out there angry with them, both of them, f you, and then something happens to one of them, and that's the last thing you say.
Mm.
When I was in elementary school, they had some kind of speaker come in, and they said the last thing you should tell your parents every night is you love them because you never know what's going to happen. That stuck with me. So last thing I tell my kids every night is that I love them. You know, even when I'm in conflict with siblings or parents, I want to let you know I love you.
Mm.
So, um, uh, I'm grateful that it was. Selfishly, I wish we had more time with him. Uh,
Mm.
um, his wife, like I said, is a saint, a wonderful, wonderful woman. Um, but I mean, it does give me a little bit of peace knowing that, hey, he was thanking me for something else, but his last words to me during the weekend that I headlined his club were thank you, and my last words to him was being able to tell him I appreciate him.
Mm.
I mean, it's
It doesn't get better than that in some
no,
ways.
dude. What I mean, other than Cody beating Roman and having his mom come in the ring and giving her the belt, uh, what was better than that?
Mm. I understand
Although,
what it is.
having said that, what I thought they should have did, this is me being the fantasy booker. I thought that next night, um, he should have went out there and on Raw and gave his mom the belt, and that would have been the debut of MJF coming in to attack them from behind, and then Damian Priest cashing in after one day with the belt, and then you would have had the image of MJF ripping the belt out of his mother's hands. Uh,
I think they'll use that one day. I,
the,
I
the,
I could see them using that one day because JF's got to get.
no, but instead what we got was the next day, him and The Rock holding each other's belts, and The Rock pretending that he didn't give that belt to Muhammad Ali's wife to give to him.
Mm.
Like, what the
Yeah,
fuck?
I know. I know. As we look at wrapping this up, Dan, because this has been a great emotional conversation. Thank you for a great conversation. We're going
Thank you,
to
man.
do a segment that is a staple on this channel, which almost feels a little bit cheap to do this segment now, but
Let's do it.
hopefully,
Let's do it.
hopefully it'll lighten the mood, sort of thing. We're going to do a segment that is called generic wrestling questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know as well. I asked Dan his favorite match, favorite pay-per-view card, such overall card, such as Double or Nothing 2019, for example. Favorite wrestler's entrance team, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Basically, the questions I assume Dan might be asked on social media or in live streams, like when he appeared on Between Two Beards recently and things like that. So now you'll have a place, Dan, to be like, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's
Yeah.
your favorite match of all time?
WrestleMania 18, Rock Hogan.
Why does that one speak to you as a fan?
Because I was a diehard going into it, but that was the match that solidified my love forever.
That's really, really cool. What about your
Yeah.
favorite pay-per-view card?
Favorite pay-per-view card? Um, I don't know if I'm looking at the main event too much on this, but No Way Out 2004 with Eddie winning the belt.
Oh yeah. Mm.
Because I remember being in that bar watching that, being a high schooler in a bar, watching that, and just absolutely going nuts.
Mm.
Plus, the rest of the card was pretty good too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, was this that same bar that we talked about earlier in this conversation?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, there
Yeah.
were probably two or three different bars I used to go to. From the time I was a teenager to the time when, the network came around. But yeah, it must have been the same bar.
That's really, really cool. What about your favorite wrestler's entrance theme of all time?
Favorite theme. Um, it's got to be Steve Austin. Dun
Mm.
dun 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 dun.
I'm going to ask this question. Disturbed version, yay or nay?
Disturbed, yay.
Mm.
Not the
Why
best,
does
but it's a yay.
why does the Steve Austin theme speak to you as a fan?
I mean, did a theme fit a wrestler better than that?
Mm.
I mean, his character, his march, his walk, I should say. The whole aesthetic of Steve Austin from the big match of him just walking down there, or if you remember when the invasion hit, and I think they used
The old
Disturbed,
Stone
the
Cold.
old Stone Cold, but
I wasn't even watching wrestling at that point, and I know what that is. That's how
yeah,
iconic that theme is.
and I mean, I think maybe that was the Disturbed one during
I
then,
think it
but I,
is,
I don't.
yeah.
But even then, because it had that Stone Cold theme core in the background to it though, which
Mm.
is still why it gets a big yay for me. Um, and he's coming to the ring and he's talking his smack as he's doing it. I mean that even when he comes out there on the four wheeler, it just fits.
Mm.
Everything fits.
Mm. I fully agree. What about your favorite tag team?
It's got to be the New Day. And as a Jim Cornette guy, and this is where I'm gonna interject here really quick because Jim Cornette did not watch the initial days of the New Day. So he's only watching based off of however long he's been reviewing Raw and SmackDown.
Mm.
And yes, the gimmick got a little bit stale there the last couple of years. I think what's going on now is going to be something that really helps it out with the tension between Kofi and Woods. Um, I think but Cornette looks at it like these are just goofballs being goofballs. He didn't see how it was essentially a death gimmick going into it, and how he didn't watch in 2014 how the fans in Philly, when Woods is on the railing trying to get the fans into it, get them clapping, and they're clapping, but they're chanting "New Day sucks," and that immediately took off.
Mm.
And he didn't see how this gimmick that should have gotten all three of them fired, they're like, okay, we'll give you guys a little bit of your own personality to put in, and
Mm.
became hands down the best thing in wrestling in 2015, and quite frank, probably 2016 too.
Mm. I would
So
agree with that, if I'm honest. And then finally, Dan, the biggest generic question, in my opinion: who is your favorite overall wrestler?
it's got to be Roman Reigns. I mean, the guy, I can't think of anyone who's had a better run in the last 4 years, and doing it through two different bookers, eh, through Vince McMahon and through Triple H,
Mm,
through, um, did anybody come out more hated? Did anyone start more hated and come out more beloved than that guy?
mm,
Um, I always thought those early days when people were booing him was wrong.
mm.
Um, I think we're seeing a little bit of a conscience come into wrestling fans right now. Because do you remember a couple weeks ago on SmackDown, maybe it was like a month ago or whatever, when Tonga Loa is in the ring and the fans in the arena are chanting, "You can't wrestle."
Yes.
And I remember, like, I'm sure if I was in the arena, I'd probably join along too. But maybe it hit something different being at home. And it seemed that Twitter also agreed, and other fan bases agreed, other online platforms agreed, where, hey, Tongaloa had some botches that have been really funny. I don't think we can disagree about that. But saying that he can't wrestle is not cool because he can.
Oh yeah.
And I think,
He wouldn't be signed to WWE if he could wrestle. Come on
and
now.
it's one of those things where, okay, telling John Cena, the top guy on the top show in the top wrestling company, that he can't wrestle is one thing, but doing it to a guy who's not in that position is just wrong.
Mm.
It just felt wrong. I mean, could you imagine? And like, what if somebody did that to Heath Slater?
Mm.
That's probably my favorite jobber of all time because people never give him credit for being as great as he was.
Mm.
But I mean, imagine audiences doing that to him, and it's like
Oh
that's
yeah.
clearly not true. The guy can work.
Oh god, yeah. I see your point 100%. So we're going Roman Reigns for your favorite overall wrestler, though, yeah?
It's got to be. It's got to be. Yeah.
That's really, really cool, Dan. As we wrap this up, obviously, I want to say thank you for a great conversation. But the question I end this show on is I believe as YouTubers, podcasters, even just people with social medias, comedians, etc., we're all sort of going to live forever in a very, very weird way, if you think about the word. So, what is
Yeah.
one piece of content you're like, I would like to be remembered for that? Then, what is one that you're like, yuck, please forget about that, guys?
What's something I want to be forgotten about?
A piece of content you've done in the past that you're like, forget about that. I don't want to be remembered for that. And then what is one that you're like, if I was remembered for that piece of content as a creator, I'd be happy with that.
the stuff I want to be forgotten is the stuff in my early days of comedy, putting it out there. Um, I explained this to people too, where when you're new to comedy, you're so excited and you're inviting everyone out to your shows, but the problem is after a while that well dries up because these people just can't keep on coming out every single time. And if you bomb in front of somebody, you know, after talking about it so much, they're just going to believe you're not funny.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh yeah, Dan kept talking about it, but man, I saw him and boy did he suck. Um, and that happened where some people I went to high school with came out to a show and I ate it so hard, and I didn't know they were there, and it was a rough weekend. Every show I bombed, and then 2 weeks later, I'm back at that club, different comedian, and I have a much better show. I have far better. And one of the guys from high school was actually at that show too. And I was like, see, I told you I'm good at this. You didn't believe me, but I knew it. But I mean, some of the stuff I put out there in the beginning days, just because you become so much better as time goes on. You know what I mean?
definitely. Yeah, yeah.
I tried podcasts, in the early days of comedy too, and looking back, they were definitely terrible. Some of the videos I put out, the stage presence wasn't quite there. The jokes weren't fully developed yet. Again, because you don't know what you're doing. You're just doing
Mm,
it. Um, so I kind of wish I could take some of that stuff back. Um, the things I'm most proud of, I mean, the Dry Bar special was really cool. I mean, I remember saying to myself the next day in the airport as I was about to fly back home that if this is the only if this is the biggest thing I do in comedy, at least it's a pretty cool big thing. Um, if it's any particular jokes, it's probably the two jokes I'm known the most for, probably the three. Which is funny because I had one comedy club tell me before, like, Dan, you talk about Batman and comic books, you talk about wrestling. Do people really like this? Dungeons and Dragons? And I'm like, well, the audiences liked it. Yeah, but do most people get it? And then the very first three jokes I do in my dry bar special, Batman, wrestling, D&D.
That's really cool. That is
So
cool.
those are the three jokes that seem to have gotten the most amount of attention for me across social media. Um, so if you're gonna look at it, it's the joke about having a Batman themed wedding, which I had a Batman themed wedding. It's a joke
Oh, I've
about
seen this on YouTube.
thank you, brother. Somewhat fictional, but still based off of truths. A lot of truths. Um, the joke about watching wrestling with my wife, and her being like, "I hate wrestling. Can we watch something else?" And then I hit her with a chair. Um, um, and then it's got to be the Dungeons and Dragons joke because that was probably my most viewed video was that one in particular on my own social medias.
That's really, really cool. Just quickly before we get out of here, best Batman of all time. Who is it?
All right, so Affleck is my favorite actor. However, I'm going to say, as much as I love Affleck's Batman, I don't think he got a fair shot because Warner Brothers put their hands in too many things. It's going to come down between Burt Ward. I'm not Burt, Adam West. Burt Ward was Robin. Adam West, Christian Bale, Kevin Conroy, the
Hmm.
voice of Batman. And
Absolutely.
I have to put Kevin Conroy in there because every time you read a comic book, in your
You hear his
head,
voice, don't you?
you're
Yeah.
listening to Kevin Conroy.
I'm a huge Batman fan, so I
There
agree
you
with
go.
that.
Yeah.
Dark
Same.
Knight is my favorite film of all time.
Yeah, dude, I think Dark Knight's without a doubt my favorite comic book film. And it's tied with my favorite film of being Good Will Hunting, being 1A and 1B there. Um, but yeah, Dark Knight is without a doubt excellent. I think there were zero holes in that movie, at least none that I can really see. Um, Everything made sense. Christian Bale was excellent.
Mm.
Uh, I don't think there's a word to describe what Heath Ledger did. It was that good.
Oh yeah.
Like if 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 Christian Bale was excellent, if Morgan Freeman was excellent, whatever Heath Ledger did was beyond that.
Mm.
And I mean, because of that, I mean, I've gone as the Joker for probably 4 out of the last 5 years for Halloween in full Heath Ledger makeup. So,
That's really cool. As we wrap this up, Dan, obviously I want to say thank you for a great conversation, but please promote yourself. Where can the good people find you, your work, etc.?
so on YouTube and on Facebook, you can find me at Dan Brown Comedy. On Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok, it's at X Dan Brown. I'm straight edge, so the X is literally the letter X, not EX, as in like ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend. It's X Dan Brown.
That's really, really cool. Uh, as we wrap this up, guys, obviously, I want to say thank you for watching. Please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish if you like this. Follow me on Twitter, or as Dan said, X. And I
X.
will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.
Thanks for watching this Tom Talks Rubbish conversation. Before you go, please make sure you leave a like on the video, share it around, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish on YouTube, as well as follow Tom Talks Rubbish on Twitter/X.